Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's midweek message from Messiah Lutheran Church in Mechanicsville, Virginia. My name is Pastor Ryan Ratke, and I'll be continuing our June theme of Lutheran stories. What I've got for you is I'm going to be sharing some stories with you because I have these books, I have these resources, but I'm guessing not all of you have some of these books on your shelves or know some of these stories in your internal library. So wanted to share some of these with you. These are coming from two books that came out within the last 5 years, either leading up to or shortly after the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, which was commemorated in 1517, 500 years after it is said Martin Luther, nailed those 95 theses to the church door in Wittenberg to get some debate going, and then that all snowballed into, hey, look, now there's a bunch of denominations. That's the short version. The Lutheran Church is identified a lot of times with Scandinavians and Germans and the 1500s and maybe Johann Bach. There's various things that maybe you've heard of before. But maybe what you don't know is that underneath some Lutheran culture that you may have picked up from the likes of Garrison Keillor, there's at the core of what we do, at the core of our identity as Lutherans, is a Lutheran theology. And that theology rooted in God's grace and with all the lovely complexities of human life and the life of faith in this world of ours, this broken world, um, that Luther and others were able to articulate. That's something very powerful that has had an impact on our world. And it's not just a Northern European thing. It's not just a thing from the past, but it's a movement that's spread around the world that has adapted and grown. And as Lutheranism has gone to other parts of the world, it's rubbed off on us back here, and it's got a life of its own. So during that Reformation anniversary, a lot of attention was put on Lutherans. And so the first book I've got to share is called Together by Grace, Introducing the Lutherans. It's got a little bit of everything: history, kind of what we're up to now, looking ahead to the future, looking around the world. This one's kind of a sampler platter of Lutheranism. So this is kind of a good entree into what Lutheranism is all about if you want to learn more across the board. This is by, I should say, it's edited by Catherine A. Kleinhans, and it's from Augsburg Fortress. This one is called Stories from Global Lutheranism, a Historical Timeline. This started as just sort of a history timeline project and turned into a deeper book. It's by Martin J. Lorman. This one's by Fortress Press. Same company, different wings. Um, this one gets into sort of key historical movements in the Lutheran Church over the last 5 centuries. And this one gets a little bit more um, it's more historical. Let's just put it that way. It feels like you're reading history, but in little bite-sized pieces throughout. So we're going to share with you from these again today. And why am I just reading to you? Is it because it's the summer? Maybe a little bit, but also because, like I said, you don't probably have these books, or maybe you haven't heard these stories. I haven't heard all of these stories. So I want to share them with you, leave you with a couple of points to ponder, and um, see what you do with it from there. First one I'm going to share with you today is from Together by Grace. And this section that it's in is called Faith Active in Love. So it talks about how Lutheran theology, Lutheran faith, isn't just something you think about or you hear in a sermon, it's something you live. And Lutheranism in general, and our denomination, the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, has different activities and ministries that it's part of. So this section kind of touches on a lot of how our faith is lived out through different agencies and ministries. This one is called Organizing to Serve, and this article is by the book's editor, Catherine A. Kleinhans. But it's going to cover 3 different Lutheran ministries: Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, Lutheran World Relief, and Lutheran Services in America. So, first, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. And remember, this was written in 2016, published in 2016. The work of Lutherans in resettling refugees gained public attention with the release of Clint Eastwood's 2008 movie, Gran Torino. You seen that one? I haven't heard good things. Eastwood plays Walt Kowalski, an embittered Korean War veteran who over time develops a relationship with the Hmong family living next door. In one scene, Walt asks how and why the Hmong came to the Midwest. His neighbor Sue answers, "Blame the Lutherans. They brought us over." Walt responds, "Everybody blames the Lutherans." In the aftermath of World War I, U.S. Lutherans made efforts to support European refugees. As World War II began in Europe, the number of refugees grew, and in 1939, the organization today known as Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services was founded. 1/3 of the displaced persons in Europe after World War II were Lutheran, and it was natural for U.S. Lutherans, the vast majority of whom had immigrant roots themselves, to reach out with a welcoming, helping hand. Since its founding, LIRS has resettled more than 379,000 refugees from around the world, refugees from many countries and of many faiths. This ministry is complex. According to the LIRS website from 5 years ago, refugees are resettled through a network of 28 local organizations in 26 states, most of which are Lutheran social ministry organizations. 16 of those organizations also provide immigration legal services. Asylum seekers, survivors of torture, and other migrants impacted by detention are served through 23 partners providing legal and social services, including visitation ministry. In addition, we work directly with 8 foster care programs at the state level to provide family reunification and foster care services for unaccompanied refugee and immigrant minors. LIRS is supported by the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and the Latvian Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And if you want to check out more on them, you can go to their website at www.lirs.org. Their vision statement is, "All migrants and refugees are protected, embraced, and empowered in a world of just and welcoming communities." And their mission is, "Witnessing to God's love for all people, we stand with and advocate for migrants and refugees, transforming communities through ministries of service and justice." Um, One personal note on that, just think of all the stories in the Bible of God's people and refugee status during the exile in Babylon, um, hiding out in Egypt various generations, various times, including Jesus, Joseph, and Mary. Think of Naomi and Ruth. The Bible is full of not just stories of God's people needing refuge and migrating from one place to another, but also God's laws and commandments and Jesus' example of caring for those who are the most vulnerable. So that's where the LIRS grows out of, from our faith. Next up, Lutheran World Relief. Has your congregation or your women's group ever assembled layettes or baby care kits, school kits, quilts, maybe personal care kits with the hygiene items, and sent those overseas? If so, you've likely been a part of the Ministry of Lutheran World Relief. LWR was founded in 1945 to provide relief to those whose lives and livelihoods were devastated by World War II. Since then, the ministry of LWR has expanded to include development work, as well as the provision of material goods and supplies. Wars, famine, and natural disasters create emergency situations to which LWR responds swiftly, just as it did in the aftermath of World War II. Poverty, however, is a chronic condition and requires a longer-term strategy. To alleviate poverty and human suffering, LWR works with trusted local partners in many countries to develop sustainable projects in the areas of agriculture, health, education, and more. LWR works from a philosophy of accompaniment, recognizing that communities, no matter how poor, already have resources and assets that can be harnessed for their well-being. So instead of us from the wealthier churches over here swooping in as heroes to save the day, recognizing that not only do they already have everything they need from God and the assets, but also that we might be learning just as much from them. It's an accompaniment, a walking alongside model. Building on these assets, LWR establishes a relationship with local partners based on mutual trust and respect to create a flexible plan to improve the well-being of the poor. The numbers are impressive. In 2015, LWR sent $12.9 million worth of quilts and kits to at least 674,057 people in 19 countries. Nowadays, if you send them out, you can put a barcode on the boxes you ship, and then you'll get a report back from where your items end up. It's really kind of cool. In 2014, LWR funded 153 development projects, reaching 4,763,599 people in 35 countries. That's 5-6 years ago. Check out the website to see what they've been up to lately. Survey results show that U.S. Lutherans see LWR as a reliable and efficient way to put their Christian faith into action and to express their Christian love for neighbors. LWR is supported by the ELCA and the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod also. Without getting into our complicated history with the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church, the fact that we cooperate together on these types of ministries is quite significant in and of itself. If you'd like to learn more about LWR, go to www.lwr.org. And even right here in the book, the scriptural basis from Matthew 25, caring for the least of these. Jesus saying, when I was hungry, when I was thirsty, when you cared for the least of these who were hungry, thirsty, strangers, in prison, sick, you were caring for me. That's what LWR bases their mission. Finally, Lutheran Services in America. Folks at Messiah might be familiar with this umbrella agency since we do some work with Encircle in our area in Virginia, formerly known as Lutheran Family Services of Virginia. You've doubtless heard the saying, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Perhaps nowhere is this truer than with the work of Lutheran social ministry organizations. Lutheran Services in America, or LSA, was founded in 1997, but has a history stretching back well over 150 years. Its membership, by definition, consists of all social ministry organizations affiliated with the ELCA or recognized by the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. This means that more than 300 health and human services organizations are part of the LSA. Together, those organizations serve 6 million people annually. That's a cumulative impact of almost 1 of every 50 people in the United States. Go us. Different member organizations of LSA provide a range of social services, including senior services, healthcare, services to children and families, disability services, economic empowerment, and housing and community development. While founded and supported by Lutherans, these social ministry organizations serve anyone in need, regardless of age, race, culture, or religious affiliation. By networking together, member organizations are able to share their expertise, provide enhanced opportunities for leadership development, and advocate for the common good. So with all of these, it's not just getting to the symptoms, the immediate needs of people. It's also at the same time working on the root problems with those development, with that community work, with leadership development, so that these cycles can be broken and the root causes are addressed. You may never hear the name or see a sign for Lutheran Services in America. For instance, we have Encircle now. But you may well be familiar with one or more of those 300 plus member organizations, from Lutheran Social Services of Alaska to Mission Esperanza in Miami, Florida, from Lutheran Healthcare in Brooklyn, New York, to Bethel New Life in Chicago, to the Navajo Evangelical Lutheran Mission in Arizona. LSA spans the country with a network of care. To learn more, visit www.lutheranservices.org. That's the end of that one. So you may have heard in the first part of that with Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services that it's a complex ministry. So to highlight that, I wanted to share a story from Lutheran history that gets into how complex these problems and issues can be, and in any given time and place. We learn from what we've done before, and we try to move forward, still rooted in our biblical and theological and confessional roots. This one is from March 12th, 1734. Lutheran refugees from Salzburg arrive in Georgia. Okay, refugees, resettlement. We heard about World War I, World War II, going back a few hundred years before that. But here's another story of Lutherans and how they handle migration, immigration, refugees. Here we go. Lutherans and Catholics had lived together in the area around Salzburg, Austria, since the early Reformation. However, one Reformation Day, October 31st, 1731, a Catholic Prince Archbishop decided he no longer wanted Protestants in his lands. His cruel and unrealistic command that Protestants leave within 8 days violated the terms of the Peace of Westphalia and launched an international refugee crisis. There was some horrible wars in Europe, 1700s, Hundred Years' War, a lot of which were based in Protestant versus Catholic and theological fighting, things like that. So there was the Peace of Westphalia. International refugee crisis, eventually yielding to pressure to give the refugees a little extra time. The Prince Archbishop did not force the Salzburg Lutherans to leave until the following year, at which time approximately 20,000 people went into exile. Several Protestant lands worked together to resettle the refugees. Historian Wolfgang Splitter has shown that Jewish communities in Germany generously supported the resettlement of these refugees as well. The majority of the Salzburgers were welcomed into East Prussia. Others settled in the Netherlands, adding to the minority Lutheran population there. Through the cooperation of the Pietist institutions in Halle and the London-based Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge, another group of Salzburgers was given the chance to emigrate to the new English colony of Georgia. The first refugees arrived in March 1734. Over time, they came to settle an area about 25 miles northwest of Savannah. They named their community Ebenezer, a Hebrew name meaning stone of help, from 1 Samuel 7, verse 12. Led by two pastors, Johann Martin Bolzius and Israel Christian Gronau, the community encountered many new challenges, most notably the institution of slavery in the American colonies. Initially chartered as a non-slave holding colony, Georgia legalized slavery in 1751 due to the perceived need to compete economically with neighboring South Carolina. The Salzburgers had arrived in Georgia very much opposed to slavery for moral reasons. Even so, they expressed prejudice against enslaved Africans early after their arrival, and all of this is documented and footnoted. Some community members started to leave Ebenezer in order to own slaves in South Carolina. With increasing external pressure to allow slavery, Pastor Bolzius and the community also came to accept and practice slave ownership. As Jeff Johnson described in Black Christians, the Untold Lutheran Story, the Salzburgers developed a harmful and ineffective model for engaging the Black people around them. Their initial moral objection to slavery was already undermined by a paternalistic attitude about enslaved Africans and their presumably inferior culture. Even when white Lutherans started to baptize enslaved Africans in the colony, these racist assumptions kept the Salzburg community from getting to know the people, their needs, or their culture deeply, and resulted instead in trying to turn new converts into German Lutherans, confusing the gospel of Christ with a single cultural expression. To the detriment of their own flourishing, these prejudices prevented the Ebenezer colony from developing a strong evangelical identity or network. Although Ebenezer remained an important center of North American Lutheranism during the 1700s, pastoral conflicts after Bolzius' death in 1765 and increasing communal fragmentation came to a head around the time of the American Revolution. By the end of the century, little remained of the settlement. The experience of the Ebenezer community shows both strengths and weaknesses of Lutheran migration. The story of Lutheran refugees connected the experience of the Salzburgers with other victims of religious intolerance around the world, like the Jews who helped them, or minority groups in other countries who welcomed them in. Minority religious groups, denominational groups. It included inspiring acts of international and interfaith relief efforts. This can be a powerful example of standing with the oppressed and sharing humanitarian aid. More negatively, the new members of the Ebenezer colony quickly succumbed to social forces that betrayed their early anti-slavery morals, especially under the perceived threat of falling behind economically. Similarly, European Christian prejudice kept the Salzburgers from seeing enslaved Africans as fully human, and prevented them from extending the gospel of Jesus Christ effectively, or I might add, from seeing in the African slaves situation any parallel to their own displacement. As seen previously in the examples of New Sweden and Tranquebar previously in this book, Tranquebar, India, other models for evangelization were indeed possible. Such mixed legacies as those of the Ebenezer settlement are very much worth learning from and wrestling with. So, part of where the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services comes from, and all of our agencies and ministries comes from, is the fact that humans are humans. And through the witness of Scripture and through our own experiences and history, we know the stories of migration, of refugees, of being in the minority, and all the difficulties and challenges that come with that. Sometimes we learn from those stories, and sometimes we just swap places a few generations later between those who are vulnerable and those who aren't. What a mixed bag that story is of Lutherans receiving help, Lutherans giving help, but then Lutherans kind of just making the whole situation, not kind of, making the situations worse in Georgia. So, how do we learn from this? Well, for instance, we don't just say this is how it's always been, which isn't just a Lutheran mantra, but I know it happens in Lutheran churches. We can learn from mistakes, we can learn from the past, we can learn from the stories of others. You may have heard in the Lutheran World Relief section the term accompaniment. That is the official model also for Lutheran missionary efforts around the world. Not just that we're coming in because these other people are benighted and we're enlightened, but because we have good news to share. But instead of just forcing it on people or making them assimilate to the way we do it, we say, here it is, and we walk alongside folks and find ways for the gospel to speak to their context and also learn from their experiences and hopefully have that impact come back home to us. I love speaking to folks that are in the missionary field, learning from their experiences, other Lutherans or other Christians from around the world to hear how they worship, how they experience God, their theologies, because I learn from that too. Um, there's no one particular branch of Christianity or one group that has a monopoly on the knowledge of God. Nobody does. Go back a couple weeks to mystery. But for instance, when I was a kid, when we learned about ancient civilizations, what were the ones you learned about? Greek, Roman, um, let's see, Egyptian, sure. Maybe you learned about Chinese empires and civilizations back in the day. Maybe you had Mayan, Aztec, Incan on this side of the hemisphere. Maybe some of the different Native American nations. I never learned about anything from Africa. My youngest daughter, who's in third grade, pardon me for a second. Excuse me. Still a little pollen. My youngest daughter in third grade, she was learning about Egypt, uh, Greece, Rome, China, and then she came home with some worksheets and was telling me all about the Empire of Mali in northern Africa. I never got to learn about that. Doesn't mean that they didn't have it. That empire, that civilization, that culture wasn't there. It was. For far too long, generations and centuries, the attitude from Europeans who were exploring and claiming lands in the name of their respective countries was, well, they're different from us, that means they're inferior. They're not Christians, that means they're heathens. Just these assumptions and these just sort of impressing upon others their particular attitude instead of actually trying to get to know them, learn from them. What a tragic story that these refugees who were kicked out from Salzburg just for being different theologically couldn't then commit to applying that once they got over to our side of the ocean, uh, to others who had been kicked out, removed, enslaved from their place of origin, and put into servitude here. It's complicated, like I said. It's very easy to fall into these other patterns and to kind of forget our own salvation, the grace we've experienced, and the needs that we have had in the past. It's very easy to say, well, why don't they just do it like we do? I hope that you look up these different ministries of the Lutheran Church. Maybe you can look more into the story of the Salzburgers who came to Georgia in 1734. Um, I, I encourage you to pick up these books. You can get them from Amazon, I'm guessing, but why not go to augsburgfortress.com and send some money to our denomination's publishing house so that they can keep putting out interesting and enlightening things that we can learn from. I'm only sharing a smattering of these stories with you over the course of this month. There's a lot more. See, they're wide books. There's a lot more to dig into. So yeah, I just wanted to share these stories with you. Once again, these Lutheran stories of faith lived out in actions through our ministries and agencies. Some of your mission support that goes to the congregation gets passed along to the synod, which gets passed along to the denomination, and some of that gets sent around the world and around our country to support these ministries. So that's part of what your offerings do. But also, this is part of our heritage and our history and the global Lutheran movement that we're a part of. So get to know your Lutheran family and your Lutheran history a little better. Hopefully these are some good jumping off points for you, and I will leave it at that. Have some fun digging this week, learning some more. Keep checking in on each other, and we'll do this again next time. Take care, everybody.